Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video, where today I'm going to be completing the game with the Rapidash line, which is a perfect choice because the Year of the Horse just began a few days ago. Now, I do think that Rapidash is going to be a very good Pokemon, however, I do think that it's going to have a few problems throughout the game, but we'll get to those problems whenever they come up. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to Ponyta's stats. It has 50 HP, 85 attack, 55 defense, 65 special attack, 65 special defense, and 90 speed, making it a physical attacking fire type, which we have seen before with Flareon, can actually be really good. And with its 90 base speed, it doesn't actually have to worry about being slower than most of the threats throughout the game. Now moving on to its move pool, it gets access to mostly normal and fire type moves, which honestly isn't too much of an issue for Ponyta because it leans more to the physical side, so those normal type moves are actually pretty good. The big issue though is the fact that it doesn't learn Flamethrower through level up, meaning that I'll have to wait until about halfway through the game to get it. And the other issue is that it doesn't really have any moves early on to attack rock types, and that could possibly be an issue. But anyway, with that, let's go ahead and move on to our Ponyta in particular, who has a calm nature, raising its special defense but lowering its attack, which is definitely a bit unfortunate, though its special defense is a bit low, so maybe this will actually come in handy. It gets access to the Flash Fire ability that makes me immune to fire, and at the same time, if I'm hit by a fire type attack, it powers up my next fire type move. And it also could have had Runaway, but that's completely useless in this game. And at level 10, it gets Tackle, Tail Whip, and Growl. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the game. And unfortunately, Ponyta does have to do a little bit of grinding to get up to level 14, just to get the move Ember to even get to the old man. But once it has no problem getting through the rest of the early game. The Tackle does quite a bit to Abra, though I wonder if that minus attack nature is causing it not to be a one-shot. But anyway, the Abra goes down to Ember, he brings out Shroomish, and at this point the battle is basically won. Horsey does do quite a bit of damage with Water Gun, but as long as it never gets a crit, it's not really all that much of a threat, and I can take it down in 2 hits anyway. So the old man really isn't all too difficult. But the thing is, it is a bit unfortunate that Ponyta has already taken a couple losses in the early game simply because it had to rely on the move Tackle until it got to level 14. But luckily now that it has it, everything has been pretty smooth sailing. So we get to the Power Rangers, where today I decide to fight green because I have super effective damage against them. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on to a little bit of rambling. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now, the one thing that I really love about these games are the Pokemon animations, how they move, how they look, how they interact with moves. And Ponyta and Rapidash are in a very unique position because they're using the Gen 1 models from Pokemon Stadium, and the fire effects in those games aren't the greatest, but for some reason I actually really like it. And I think it might just come down to nostalgia because I actually like a lot of the Gen 1 Pokemon jank in the animations. And another thing is that I use the running Rapidash in the thumbnail of this video, and it's almost 1-to-1, I think, to the Rapidash in the intro of the Pokemon anime, which I think is pretty nice. Anyway, at level 19, Ponyta gets the move Stomp, which is really nice. It's a 65 base power normal type move with a chance to flinch, and then soon after I run into a Numel, who is holding the Charcoal item, which raises fire type damage by 10%. Unfortunately, the first attempt doesn't go too well, but the second attempt does, and we move on to what might possibly be the hardest battle for Ponyta in the early game, and this is against Naps, and it's mostly because of this Rhyhorn. Now, a lot of fire types and electric types struggle here simply because the Rhyhorn has the move Mud Slap, and while it doesn't do a ton of damage, it lowers your accuracy, so if you're not able to take down Rhyhorn quickly, you will just have your accuracy lowered to a point where you just miss every single move, and eventually he whittles you down. Luckily, Ponyta is in a pretty comfortable spot where, with just a couple more levels, it should be able to two-shot Rhyhorn, and it is confirmed when I get a crit and take it down in a single hit. Now luckily, the rest of Nap's team, not all that bad. If you are slower than the Murkrow, it can be an issue because it has the move Astonish, but Ponyta doesn't really have that issue, and I really thought that this was going to be a bigger challenge for it, but it got by just fine. So with Naps defeated, we now move on to the actual first boss of the game, Lavrina. She leads with a Beautifly and a Love Disc, and right away I want to give her the Love Disc because it does have Water Gun, which does deal a decent amount of damage. Gust, on the other hand, does almost nothing. Another Stomp takes down the Love Disc, then out comes Roselia, which I can take down with Ember, but before her final Pokemon comes out, at level 31, Ponyta gets the move Takedown. And while I don't really plan on using Takedown much, it is a stronger move than Stomp, so I'll go ahead and teach it over Growl, and then she sends out her Shadow Delcatty. And while I don't think I'm going to lose to it, it can do a lot of damage, so I go for Stomp hoping for a flinch, but I get a crit instead, taking it down in a single hit, and then all that's left is the Beautifly, which goes down to 1 Ember. So with that, of course, you can't have a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video without the obligatory Mirror B. Hello, Mirror B. Well, anyway, goodbye. At the Real Game Tower, I pick up my 2 favorite TMs, Hidden Power Protect, and I'm going to teach Hidden Power right away, which happens to be Hidden Power Fighting, which I think for Ponyta and Rapidash is actually going to be fairly useful, and it's even 47 base power, so while it's not the strongest, it's certainly usable. So I go ahead and teach that over Tail Whip, and then I'm also going to pick up the move Fire Blast, because even though it's not the most accurate, it does a ton of damage. So I teach it over Takedown, and then we move on to Ponyta evolving into Rapidash. Now I did miss the first half of the evolution, but that's alright, because Rapidash has 65 HP, 100 attack, 70 defense, 80 special attack, 80 special defense, and 105 speed. So I know for a fact it's going to be faster than everything in the game because we are going to be a bit over leveled, and its offensive stats are really good, its defenses are good enough, however its 65 HP does leave me a bit worried. But anyway, we now go into the battle against Snaddle, and I've already taken quite a bit of damage in the previous fight, and I do see that Stomp is doing half to Lantern, which means that as long as I get a flinch there, that is going to be a very easy Pokemon to take down. Though unfortunately I don't get to see too much after. Go back into the battle once again right away, and Stomp is doing over half, so I think the range of damage is in my favor. Lantern gets taken down by a second Stomp, and then out comes Shadow Lunatone. And I'm going to go for Fire Blast into it, hoping that it's going to do a lot of damage, and it is doing over half. It's able to set up Shadow Sky. Rock Tomb hits again, lowering my speed for a second time. And unfortunately, Lunatone is now able to outspeed. It does a ton of damage with the Shadow Wave. I'm able to take it out though, and then out comes Cast Form. Rock Tomb takes me down to 10 HP, and while I do survive the Fruity Pebbles, Cast Form outspeeds now and finishes me off. So it's obvious I just need to do a little bit of extra training, so I get up to level 44, and on this attempt I'm able to flinch the Lantern right away and finish it off. Then out comes the Lunatone once again. Though now with a few more levels, I go for Fire Blast, and it takes it down to about a quarter. And instead of going for Fire Blast now, I'm going to go for a much more accurate move, that being Hidden Power Fighting, which does take it down from that health. Then out comes Cast Form. After a quick round of Fruity Pebbles, I go for Hidden Power Fighting to take down the Cast Form in a single hit, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, Matang. Another Rock Tomb from Quagsire takes me down to half. And I have the decision to either go for Ember or Fire Blast. I decided to risk it on a Fire Blast because I knew it would be a one-shot, and then all that's left is the Quagsire, which I go for Stomp, takes it down below yellow, it gets flinched, and I finish it off with one last Stomp. Now with Snaddle defeated, I move on to the SS Libra, where I finally pick up the move Flamethrower, which I teach over Ember, and then I go into the battle against Gonzap. He leads with a Nuzleaf and Electrode, and this is the second attempt because the first one was ended immediately. But I go for Flamethrower to take down the Nuzleaf, then out goes Vileplume. Luckily the Electrode is just going for Sonic Boom, which is only 80% accurate, and only does 20 damage, so I take down the Vileplume, then out goes Whiscash, which is probably his most dangerous Pokemon, so I go for Fire Blast, which takes it down to low red. And it goes for Hyper Beam, luckily instead of Water Pulse or Rock Tomb, and because it's stuck recharging, I decide to take down Electrode this turn, which sends out its final Pokemon, Skarmory, which is absolutely not a threat. I take down the Whiscash, and then Skarmory goes for a Hyper Beam, taking me down to 14, but Flamethrower finishes it off. So with that, with nothing in between, we move on to Gorgon, who leads with a Lairon and a Celio, and right away I go for Hidden Power Fighting into Celio, because it does have the Thick Fat ability, which reduces the damage of Fire-type moves. He sends out Slowking, which I do have to with Stomp, and Earthquake nearly takes it down. I finish it off with another Stomp, and then out comes Ursaring, and I decide to play this attempt a little risky. I get rid of Lairon instead, because Ursaring is going to be using Earthquake, which is going to be doing a lot more damage. At least that's what I thought it was going to be doing. Instead it goes for Slash. I take down the Shadow Primeape, bringing out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Hypno. This time it decides to go for Earthquake, dealing quite a bit of damage to it. Go for Flamethrower to take down the Ursaring. I get a crit, but I don't think it was necessary, and then all that's left is the Hypno, which decides to go for Shadow Down, and Flamethrower finishes it off. So with that, Rapidash is now moving on to the final area of the game, and right now it's doing great. So as long as there's no major hurdles, it should come out doing very well. So with that, let's go ahead and go into the battle against Lavrina. She leads with a Gorbis and a Gardevoir, and right away I go for Fire Blast into Gorbis because its special defense is quite low. Then Gardevoir goes for Psychic, unfortunately getting a special defense drop on the very first turn. I take down Roselia with a Flamethrower. She then sends out her first Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Farfetch'd, and I want to get rid of it right away because it is going to go for moves like Shadow Panic. And so once it goes down, she sends out our final Pokemon, a Shadow Altaria. So now I need to get rid of the Gardevoir, which takes me down to half. I go for Flamethrower into it, which luckily does take it down, and then all that's left is Altaria, which I decide to go for Stomp, hoping for a flinch, and unfortunately I don't get it, and it's not quite doing half, so I decide to swap over to Flamethrower, thinking it'll do a bit more damage. Unfortunately, it survives on just a sliver and finishes me off. So I go into the battle for a second attempt, and this time Gardevoir doesn't lower my special defense, so I get into the fight with Altaria with a lot more HP. And so, despite not getting any flinches on Stomp, I take it down, and we beat Lavrina on the second attempt. Now moving into the volcano, and I run into another Rapidash. Hello, the Rapidash. Goodbye, other Rapidash. At the top of the volcano, I run into Snaddle once again. He leads with the Quagsire and Matang, and right away I want to get rid of the Quagsire because it's using Mud Shot, lowering my speed, which could eventually become a problem. So once it goes down, he sends out Scizor, which is 4 times weak to fire, so I'm not at all worried about it. So I take it down in a single hit, and then he sends out his first Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Solrock. And if I'm not able to take it down on the first turn, it is going to set up Shadow Sky, so I decide to go for Fire Blast because it has a lower special defense, but unfortunately it's not quite a one-shot. It does get burnt though, so there is a chance it will go down to the burn. And not quite, it survives on a sliver. I decide to go ahead and take it down because I don't want to get hit by its boosted Shadow Rave. So once it goes down, out comes Castform, and I do want to get rid of it right away as well, so I take it down with Flamethrower, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Starmie. Now, Starmie could be an issue depending on how much damage it's dealing, but luckily I still do think I have the speed advantage, so I go for Stomp, hoping for a flinch. Unfortunately I don't get it, but it is doing well over half. And just as I expected, Shadow Storm does a lot, so I go back in for a second attempt, and unfortunately no flinch. It's not until the third attempt when finally I get the flinch and take down Snaddle. Now I should note that I did do a little bit of extra training between the first and second attempt, just to help my survivability, but it didn't really end up mattering too much. Anyway, with that, Snaddle is defeated, and we move on to the next boss, Ardos. He leads with a Shadow Swallow and Alakazam, and this trainer might actually be quite difficult. I go for Flamethrower to take down Swallow right away because Alakazam doesn't actually have any moves that really hurt Rapidash. Then out comes Kingdra. I go for Stomp, hoping for a flinch, and luckily I do get it. So I'm able to take it down without having to worry about a Hydro Pump. And then out comes this next Pokemon, Heracross, which is weak to Flamethrower, so I know it'll go down in a single hit. And then once it does, he sends out his next Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Electabuzz. And while I could keep it alive hoping that it decides to go for Shadow Mist, I decide to take it down because his final Pokemon, a Shadow Snorlax, would definitely be way too dangerous if it's guaranteed to hit its Shadow Ends. So an unfortunate crit from Alakazam takes me down to low health, and Snorlax hits Shadow End, which is a bit unlucky, but I think it's about time I finally teach the move Protect, which I decide to teach over Hidden Power. It would be very nice during this battle to take down the Snorlax, but it's not really necessary. Anyway, on this attempt I decide to take down Alakazam, and the reason being is that the Swallow could possibly decide to go for Shadow Half, which it is. And the great thing about Shadow Half is that as long as I protect every other turn and it decides to go for it every other turn, I can take every one of his Pokemon down to half health, especially the bigger threats like Kingdra, and not have to worry about taking any damage from them. So I go for another Protect, Swallow is still going for Shadow Half, then out comes the Heracross, and I already know Heracross is a one-shot, so it's not a threat. But then things get a little tricky when Electabuzz comes out, because there is a chance that it's just going to set up Shadow Sky. Though it's still probably best just to go for Protect anyway, but as it turns out they both decide to go for Shadow Half. So maybe had I attacked that turn I would have taken half my health and damage, but Snorlax would have also been taken down to half health. But that it doesn't end up happening. Of course, Swallow does lower my evasiveness, and so Shadow End does hit, but every time it hits, it does have his remaining HP, So I'm able to finish off the Snorlax, and then all that's left is the Swallow, which I know outspeed. And with that, Ardos is defeated on the second attempt, so not too bad. Now moving on to Gorgon, he leads with a Slowking and an Ursaring. I go for Stomp into the Slowking right away, dealing half its health, and another Stomp finishes it off. Luckily, I do get a flinch as well, then out comes Aggron. And now it's a bit of a 50-50. Ursaring decides to go for Protect, so luckily I chose right. Aggron decided to attack that turn, and then out comes Walrein. Now, Walrein, of course, still has the Think About ability, reducing damage from Flamethrower, but I'm thinking it's still my best move. And luckily it's still doing half, and it gets a burn, so if there was any chance it wasn't going to take it down, now I know it will. And to make matters even better, Ursaring decided to go for Earthquake that turn. Taking it down to low enough health, that burn finishes it off. So out comes Poliwrath, I go for Stomp into it, and it's not quite doing half. It does set up Shadow Sky, and Earthquake does take it down to low yellow, but unfortunately there's no way for me to win this battle anymore because I can't heal, and both of his Pokemon can take me down, so I decide to go for Flamethrower just to make sure Ursaring goes down in a single hit, which it does, and then he sends out the final Pokemon, Mr. Mime, but unfortunately Shadow Storm finishes me off, and so I decide to go over to the Tutor Lady to go pick up the move Body Slam. The reason being is that Poliwrath wasn't quite taken down to half health, but I think with Body Slam it will be. The only real downside of Body Slam is it doesn't have that 30% chance to flinch, but it does have a 10% chance to paralyze, which could potentially be much stronger. So with that, I go for Body Slam to take down Slowking, and then out comes the Aggron once again, and this time I end up choosing wrong. So Ursaring is able to hit me with a Slash, but on the following turn I know the Ursaring is going to protect, so I go for Flamethrower to take down Aggron, and then he sends out Walrein. Now before the weather starts getting set up, I decide to go for Protect here to heal up some, and luckily that works out in my favor because Ursaring decides to go for Earthquake, go for Body Slam into Walrein, which unfortunately leaves it on just a sliver of HP, but this might actually work out in my favor. I decide to go for Flamethrower to take down the Ursaring, which sends out the Poliwrath once again, and the Poliwrath, because I know it's going to be a 2-shot, it's always going to have the chance to set up Shadow Sky. And while I did get the paralysis, luckily it didn't go off, otherwise this wouldn't have worked at all. Walrein goes down to the Fruity Pebbles, and then out comes the Mr. Mime once again. I'm still not in the best position because my health is pretty low. I don't even know why I decided to go for Protect there, but I go for Body Slam to take down the Mr. Mime in a single hit, and then all that's left is the Poliwrath, which Shadow Storm takes me down to 37 HP. Luckily it didn't get a crit, and so I'm able to finish it off with another Body Slam and beat Gorgon. Now, one thing that I ran into, and I'm kind of glad I did, is that whenever Rapidash gets frozen, the flames on its body also completely freeze. Anyway, moving on, we now move on to Eldis, who has a Shadow Manectric and Ninjask, and I go for Flamethrower into the Manectric right away to take it down, and then he sends out his second Shadow Pokemon, which is a Shadow Salamence, and Salamence is going to be a bit of an issue because it does lower my attack, and it's also resistant to all of my Fire-type moves. However, there is a chance that my Fire-type moves are going to deal more damage, so I decided to test Flamethrower, and it's looking like it could do about half. So if I do need to redo this fight, I'll go with Flamethrower next time instead. Anyway, luckily I do have the best pattern for Ninjask because it is just going to go for Dig every other turn. After Salamence goes down, he sends out Flygon, and it's going for Double Edge, meaning that it's really not too much of a threat either. I go for Flamethrower, taking it down below half. And I go for another Protect to avoid the Ninjask. And then I finally finish off the Flygon with another Flamethrower, and then he sends out his next Pokemon, which is about the only thing on the team I'm actually fearful of, and that is the Shadow Marowak. And while I am almost certain Flamethrower will take it down, if it doesn't, that's going to be very bad. Luckily it does, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Lapras. And because it's part Ice type, Fire type moves are neutral, so I go for Flamethrower, and it's dealing well over half. It burns it, which wasn't necessary, but if it was doing a bit less, that would have been very nice. I go for another Flamethrower to finish it off, and then all that's left is the Ninjask, which has perfectly lined itself up to get taken down this turn, because once it comes out of the ground, Flamethrower finishes it off. So with that, we now move on to the big box legendary Shovelwalkia, and I go for Flamethrower into it, dealing about a third. And I think there's a chance that Fire Blast might actually take it down at this percent, so I decide to go for it. It does survive with just a little bit of HP though. It takes me down to half, go for Protect just to heal up as much as I can before the final battle, and finish it off with Body Slam. So now moving on to the battle against Gravel, he leads with a Shadow Moltres and Rhydon, and I go for Body Slam into Moltres. Unfortunately, it's not doing quite half, and I get taken down almost immediately, so I go back in once again. Of course, confirming my suspicions with a crit, Moltres is going to be at least a 3-shot, and Rhydon is doing half my health and damage. So I'm definitely not in a great position right now. I take down the legendary bird, then out comes Executor, which I can take down with Flamethrower, but Rhydon hits again with a crit, taking me down. So now on the 4th attempt, I've decided to do a little bit of extra training and use up all my rare candies to get up to level 82, where I can finally 2-shot the Moltres, and Rhydon misses a Shadow End, and I go for another Body Slam to finish it off, and then out comes the Executor. Now, at this point, I do want the Rhydon to hit, that way it can take itself to half HP, that way I can take it down with a Flamethrower. And luckily it does just that. I take it down, and then he sends out his Tauros. And Tauros is a bit of a tricky Pokemon because it is going to set up Shadow Sky on the first turn. And I think had I not gotten hit by the Executor right then, I would have left the Tauros alive. However, it powering up the moves of the legendary birds I think is going to be more of an issue. So I take it down, leaving Executor, who hits another Shadow End, which is just a bit unfortunate. The Articuno decides to set up Shadow Sky itself, which I wasn't expecting, and so I take it down with a Flamethrower, and then out comes Zapdos. Now, at this point, if Executor hits me at all again, I will lose, and if Zapdos isn't a one-shot, I'll lose. But luckily Zapdos goes down, Executor misses, and so I'm able to beat Gravel on the 4th attempt. So with that, how well did Rapidash do? Well, it beat the game at a time of 10 hours, 26 minutes, and 58 seconds at level 82, with 27 feints throughout the game. 11 of those to bosses, and 16 of those to random trainers. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about the good and bad of Rapidash. First off, let's go over the pros. I do think that its speed is really good. It's always helpful to have a speedy Pokemon. And the fire type is overall pretty good in this game. However, it really comes down to the fact that its type variety isn't all that great, and while it is easily comparable to Flareon in a lot of ways, it does not hit nearly as hard as Flareon does on the physical side. And a lot of its losses to random trainers really comes down to it being stuck with Ember up until about halfway through the game, and so it feels a bit underpowered until you either get Fire Blast or Flamethrower. The other thing is that even though I could have had Body Slam much earlier and got rid of Stomp, Stomp does have that 30% chance to flinch, which can get you out of a lot of situations, and was even good until the last area of the game, where eventually I did decide to get rid of it. And the last thing to note is that because it starts with Tackle at the very beginning of the game, there are a few trainers that can actually take it down, where realistically they shouldn't, because they either lower your attack so much, or they have water types that deal a lot of damage. But with all that being said, I do think that overall Rapidash is a very solid Pokemon throughout the game, and therefore it finds itself near the bottom of the A tier. So with that, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!